Today we're travelling back over 2,000 years to ancient Rome. An empire that needs no introduction, Romans were master builders and engineers and invented many things we still use today, such as underfloor heating, concrete and the modern calendar. But for the most part, the single thing that helped the Roman Empire tear the world a new one was its military prowess. Rome boasted one of the highest win-to-loss ratios of any army in history, being victorious in battle over 133 times. So what did the Romans know about warfare that other empires didn't? In today's episode, we will be exploring the extensive and brutal training that Roman recruits endured before they became sworn members of the mighty legion. Rome had one very simple goal: to create the ideal soldier, one who was unmatched by any other nation or empire of the time. This desire to have a formidable army largely originates from the Gaul invasion of Rome in 700 BC, which led to the Romans, whose army consisted mainly of farmers with pitchforks back then, being totally overwhelmed. So much so that the Romans had to pay the Gauls a considerable amount of gold to leave Rome, in fear of having their lands and people completely ravaged and pillaged. Never again, said Rome, and centuries of trial and error began to create one of the most formidable armies in history. It should come as no surprise then that Roman soldiers were not only subject to extreme training, but also a very specific selection and recruitment process, unlike many other military powers of the time, who would take just about anyone who could shake a spear. A little disclaimer, we will be focusing on the early Roman Empire, as it was arguably the peak of the Roman military power. Firstly, every Roman soldier had to be a Roman citizen. Whilst this isn't something that lasted throughout the entire history of Rome's army, as I mentioned just a minute ago, we are focusing on early Rome. Romans were aware that some places, peoples, and nations were more accustomed to war than others, and this played a part in their selection process. Recruits from the countryside were largely preferred and made up the bulk of the Roman army. This is because men from the countryside were considered to be more accustomed to the struggles of life from an earlier age. They were often stronger, went longer without eating, and unlike their city-slicking counterparts, recruits from the countryside were also believed to have a more practical knowledge of some of the tools they may be using whilst in the army. Men from the cities were of course taken into the legions, but had to undergo a slightly different program. Being trained extra hard in order to be brought into shape, recruits were taught to bear the weather, amongst other things, and had to be stationed as far away from their city so that they forgot all about its luxuries and comforts. After being drawn in, young Roman men were given a careful examination with particular emphasis on certain desirable features. These included a good physical shape and good eyesight, both indicators of a healthy body, good genetics and a promising soldier, wide shoulders, a small waist, a height of 5.7 Roman feet, which was a requirement for all Roman infantry, with anything over that being highly favourable. In case you didn't know, the average Roman was pretty short. A strict requirement for a height of 6 Roman feet was set to join the first cohort and cavalry of each legion. Theoretically, that is, as I already mentioned, Romans were on the smaller side, so a lack of height could be compensated with a strong physical physique. Less obvious features included lively eyes, which was an indicator that a man was of quick thinking and quick mind. Good manners, as well as a reputable family, were indicators of the ability to obey orders and show respect. Literacy and even a sense of humour were taken into account, as having one would imply a positive attitude. Once the selection process was finalised, the recruits would endure a 4-month trial. Those that wouldn't make it would be rejected, while those that had passed would swear a military oath and be officially accepted as mighty legionnaires. The first skill all recruits were taught was the march. This was considered the most important part of their training. While it might sound strange that marching might be considered more important than learning how to wield a sword, it had many advantages for the army. By performing synchronized marches, soldiers were taught the importance of coordination and unit cohesion, which was the backbone of the Roman way of war. Every week, recruits would be expected to march 20 Roman miles, which is about 18 miles or 30 kilometers, in just 5 hours, all while carrying 60 pounds of equipment. Once a while, a forced march was ordered, and the men had to complete 24 Roman miles, or 22 miles, 35 kilometers within the same 5 hours. From their first day to their last day in the army, the men were constantly taught to maintain straight ranks and a proper distance away from each other, especially when changing formations. They could be ordered to quickly double or triple the depth of the ranks, or form a wedge or defensive orb formation, all while maintaining the distance between each other and keeping the ranks straight. This was a lot harder than it might sound, and much practice was done in order to perfect this, as no imperial unit would be considered battle ready without these skills. On a larger scale, marching allowed the legion to become used to navigating through tough terrain and quickly deploy for battle, all while maintaining order in case of an unexpected engagement. It also made it harder for men to desert or get lost from their unit. The next skill that all recruits were taught was how to swim, regardless if they were infantry, cavalry, or even servants. This had significant uses, the most obvious being the strengthening of countless muscles throughout the body, as well as building up immune systems from the cold, weather, and disease, which the Romans were big believers of. Learning how to swim taught soldiers vital techniques of dealing with floods or crossing rivers. Between the swimming and the marching, the Roman army was taught to mobilize through practically any terrain under any weather condition. Once recruits had mastered the art of marching and swimming, it's time to begin their real training, the combat training. Despite the gladiators' capable ability to slash foes, recruits were taught and often encouraged to stab instead. And as with anything they did, the Romans had their reasons. Firstly, when performing a stab, less of the arm is exposed. In other words, you're less likely to get your arm chopped off. Secondly, a stab is a lot more comfortable to perform than a slash in a typical Roman formation, as it limits the possibilities of wounding fellow soldiers nearby. Thirdly, a slash is much more likely to be stopped by bone or armour, making it very difficult to land a lethal blow. But with the old stab, all it would take is 2 inches to prove lethal. Not to mention the difference in energy that it takes to slash versus to stab. Stabbing the enemy saved a lot of energy in combat and was considered one of the major factors as why the Roman legions were said to have been unrivaled in stamina during battle. Every man had to learn to throw a javelin or pilus, as the Romans call them. Just like the other weapons, practice javelins were significantly heavier than the real ones that legions would use in actual battle. However, using these heavier javelins during training improved the recruits' muscle, speed, and accuracy. Roman legions would also carry with them a large shield called a scutum. Of course, there were more specialty equipment for specific soldier classes, such as artillery, but initial training would largely consist of all the primary weapons that the legions would need to be able to use regardless of their rank or position. A less well-known fact about the Roman legions was that every single soldier, recruit and legionary alike were expected to be fully proficient with the sling, and would constantly practice using it. The weapon was so respected by the Romans and their enemies that it sometimes was thought to be more effective than bows and arrows, as its projectiles are harder to spot and could shatter bones and internal organs on impact. Imagine thousands of sharpened stones being hurled at you, along with arrows, javelins, and God knows what else. And this is before the stabbing. The youngest and most fit legionnaires and recruits were trained to use bows, either on foot or horseback. And like every other aspect of combat, these recruits were expected to practice archery on a daily basis. But what about the cavalry? Well, much like infantry, cavalry regiments also had a strict training routine. Regardless if they were recruits or veterans, all cavalrymen would practice vaulting on and off horses on a daily basis. This skill was vital for the way that the Roman cavalry operated and fought. Recruits were first taught how to vault without armour, but any combat-ready cavalryman was able to perform a vault while fully armoured and even while carrying arms like a shield and spear. This skill enabled them to mount on and off horses in an instant, under unexpected threats or even mid-battle. As the infantry performed its weekly marches, the cavalry were expected to march with them. On the same distance, however, they would constantly execute small drills, such as charging forward, retreating backwards, regrouping into formations, or practicing various maneuvers and scouting ahead. Cavalrymen and horses were often tasked to march through tough terrain. It was common, for example, for both infantry and the cavalry to perform their weekly marches by scaling mountains. As you can probably tell by now, the Roman military training was no joke, particularly as there was no health and safety back then. Not only was it dangerous, but training was done extensively by recruits and veterans. It literally never stopped
for the entire duration of a legion service. The only difference being that veterans were allowed to train for combat only once a day, while recruits typically did it morning and afternoon. Recruits would also have to do more laborious tasks such as clean toilets, dig trenches, and collect wood throughout the days. The reality was a grueling and challenging one for young men, both physically and mentally, and many simply wouldn't make it past the initial 4-month trial. However, those who completed the 4 months of continuous drills had one final task: to take a military oath and be branded with a symbol, most likely on their hands with a hot iron. This symbol marked their final day as a recruit and officially marked them as legionnaires of Rome. However, as these young warriors would learn, it's one thing to pass the drills and trials and another to execute them in the chaos of battle. Nevertheless, these drills were the core of the training that legionnaires repeated for the entire 20 to 25 years of their service, and arguably one of the reasons why the Roman legion was one of the most mightiest armies the world had ever seen. So that's it, folks, the day in the life of a Roman recruit. I hope you all enjoyed the video. I plan to make a lot more content on Rome and other historical empires and events, so if you're into your history, definitely subscribe. If you enjoyed the video, we'd really appreciate a like, as it's going to help my video get seen by other history buffs just like me and you. I'll catch you on the next one, folks. Take care.